Well, hello everybody and welcome along to the very first F1 Experiences Fancast with Crofty. That's me. F1 Experiences, well, they're the good people that bring you closer to Formula One than any other form of watching this beautiful sport. In fact, the only way you can get closer to Formula One is by hanging onto Johnny Herbert's leg during the course of a Grand Prix weekend. And as so far, he hasn't allowed anybody to do that. F1 Experiences it is. So the Fancast, what is a Fancast? Well, it's a broadcast with fans. I'm a fan, and so are my 8 guests today. So let me introduce them from around the world. First of all, from Switzerland, David Helps. Hello, good afternoon, David. David, you're in Austin. That's not Switzerland. You're on the grid in Austin, David.
I can move if it's convenient. How long's the flight?
I was expected to see mountains and goats and, cheese and Toblerone and stuff, but Austin will do nicely. Thank you very much. Nick Spalding is in the UK. Hello, Nick. Where are you?
Oh, I'm near Southampton, south coast of England.
Nice. And a beautiful part of the world it is too.
Sometimes.
Well, today it is, certainly. We're recording this, by the way, before Baku and just after Monaco, just in case you're watching a few months down the line. Nick Spalding, we've spoken to. Hayden Murphy. Hello, Hayden.
Hello.
Where are you, sir?
I am in Jacksonville, Florida.
Jacksonville, Florida, where it is always nice, bit humid, little bit sweaty, but hopefully you're having fun today. Along with Hayden, Mark Parker is also in the USA. Hello, Mark.
Hey, how you doing, everybody?
We're all very good, thank you. Are you in San Francisco?
No, I would be if I could be, but I'm actually living in Tampa at the moment. But it's a better photo.
Yeah, better photo of that than something that the Buccaneers could come up with. We go to Tanzania. Stanford Mwasongwe. Stanford, how you doing?
Hey, how are you there? So I'm actually in Jackson, Mississippi, which is the United States, but I'm originally from Tanzania, East Africa.
I was going to say, because it says down here Tanzania, if you're in somewhere near the Mississippi, you are lost, sir, if you're actually going over to Tanzania tonight. Brilliant to have you with us, Stanford. Stephanie Cameron is also in the USA. Whereabouts, Stephanie?
Near Seattle, Washington.
So over on the West Coast. Very beautiful. Michael Fleming, another fan from the USA. Michael,
yes.
How you doing?
Yes, sir. Very good. Thank you for having me, Crofty. Great to be here.
Well, it's great to have you with us. It really is. And finally, professional broadcaster, because he's the only one with a decent microphone today, Bobby Chaffardini, who will be called Bobby C for the rest of this Fancast.
Good job, Crofty, on the name. Great job.
Thank you. Whereabouts are you, Bobby C?
I'm in the Bronx, New York, and I think I do have the best set of all of our contestants or participants.
Take us through this. What do we got? We got an F1. We got Lewis Hamilton, Ayrton Senna.
Yeah, of course. We have Senna car. We have Schumacher car here on the desk. We got a little rookie card of Senna. We have Lewis Hamilton's helmet from this past championship season, a little Formula One book. Behind me, I have a picture of the Grand Prix from 2002. We will remember that one in Indianapolis. And then, of course, some other great things here on the set, including a beautiful signed picture of Sir Jackie Stewart. So trying to represent all the legends here on the show.
Well, you are doing that. Thank you very much. You've got your memorabilia. I've got a champagne bottle that's dressed up as a table lamp. I've got a massive big book of Bruce Springsteen's Born to Run, my favorite album. I've got a drawing of Ayrton Senna, which was actually drawn by Graham Loudon, the former team boss at Marussia. Very talented man he is too. And the catchphrase, lights out and away we go, on the wall. So I tell you what, it is lights out and away we go. And we'll start with David. David, what is your point that you want to make on this Fancast, sir?
So I wanted to talk to people a bit about consistency in applying the rules in F1. So any sport, the essence is we define some rules and then we compete and we see who's best. And F1 has a lot of rules. It's a technical sport and that's fine. But when I look over the last few years, we don't see consistency in how they're enforced. 3 specific examples. Let's look at Ferrari in 2019. Running fast, great car on the grid, and then at Austin, suddenly they're slow. And coincidentally, the FIA announced just a clarification to the rules, but no punishment, no announcement, no official statement that Ferrari were illegal. Then in 2020, Racing Point, get in a bit of trouble for possibly copying some brake ducts. They were docked 15 points, 400,000 euros fine. They were allowed to carry on using the part, but overall, no one came out of that looking happy. And now, as we record this, bendy wings are in the news, where the FIA said a couple of weeks ago they're going to start a new test in a month's time because some teams need time to pass the test. So I don't think you have to be an F1 expert to see that process doesn't seem to be consistent. I don't really want to discuss were the outcomes correct, because who knows, but it seems that when deciding what needs to be done, people are making it up as they go along. How is that a sport?
Right, Dave, that's a really good start. And I think we have consistency here, because I was looking at the reaction of everyone's faces, and I think pretty much everybody agrees with you that there is not enough consistency in Formula One. The trouble with Formula One, it is a very complex sport where a lot of people spend a lot of time trying to make the fastest cars on the planet. The FIA, the governing body, don't have as many people trying to stop people going too fast by circumnavigating the rules. So there is always that poacher and gamekeeper scenario where the poacher seems to have the upper hand just because there are quite a few thousand more poachers than there are gamekeepers. But I am with you. It does seem really confusing as to why the FIA can't, shall we say, in the case of the limbo wing that we're talking about at the moment, make a rule and make a rule from there, rather than saying, yeah, you've got about 2 more races to run those limbo wings before we're going to ban them. I'm expecting some sort of protest this week in Baku, because the limbo wing should be, according to Lewis Hamilton, certainly very, very effective when it comes to straight line speed. Right, but Stephanie wants to make a point. So Stephanie, you go ahead.
I just find it interesting that the application of the rules seems to depend on who's bringing the grievance.
Ah, so you think that there is a bias towards certain teams? Yeah. Should we address the elephant in the room here and talk about Ferrari's engine just a little bit? Because I was of the view that I found it very strange that the FIA didn't reveal exactly what Ferrari were doing wrong with their engine. They said that they were doing something wrong. They said that they were going to outlaw it. Ferrari were going to help them in the future and have helped them actually to understand exactly what they were doing wrong. But they didn't actually state what they were doing wrong. And that's left me as a fan, and I think you guys as a fan, and all the millions of fans around the world, a little bit in the dark. We know they were doing something wrong because the year after the FIA said stop it, Ferrari were really slow. Yeah, exactly. I couldn't have put it better, Nick. Yes, they went like that. Now, this year they've been better, which I think is good to see. But I didn't understand why there was that ambiguity around that. And to me personally, and I'll have this argument with Jean Todt if he ever wants to have it, they rather let the fans down by not explaining fully what Ferrari were up to. And I think they also let the other teams down as well, because the other teams knew that something was up. And certainly I was told by other teams, although they wouldn't go on the record to say what was wrong. And as a result of Ferrari in 2019, shall we say breaking the rules, because they were found guilty by the FIA, an awful lot of people worked very hard to try and get on parity with Ferrari. And it caused an awful lot of stress, and it caused an awful lot of disruption to people's lives to try and get on terms with a team that were cheating. Now, I don't see as that's right. That's not fair on anybody. It's not fair on the fans, not fair on the Ferrari fans who were cheated out of what could have been a magnificent season in the end. It's not fair on the fans of other teams. It's not fair on the people taking part. And I don't understand why the FIA didn't come clean and say, right, this is what Ferrari were up to. Nick, what's your point?
Yeah, I was just going to say, I've been watching Formula One for like 30 years, and this has gone on from since I started watching and way before that. I think, you know, when you go back through any kind of period of Formula One, there's always a team. So a lot of the time it's Ferrari, but there's always a team that's trying to push the envelope and do things and go right up to the line. And I think some of the problem that we have as fans is the FIA are pretty myopic about letting us know about the way things are. There's not a huge degree of transparency in terms of the regulations and the rules they make around the cars. I mean, I was also going to point out simple things like track limits. You know, you've commentated on it, Crofty. Some corners, it seems arbitrary half the time. And the thing is, we sit there watching it, and there's never anything to say, this is why it's like this. And I think that's half the reason why it gets very frustrating for us fans when you see a car that might be doing something that it shouldn't be, but we don't get a clear indication of why they're being illegal, if they're being illegal or anything like that. And it's hard to know whether to point the finger at them or not sometimes. So I think the FIA probably in the future, you know, they're trying to make the sport more appealing and so on with all the changes next year. The one thing they could definitely do is be a little bit more transparent with the fans in terms of the rules and regulations and why they make the decisions that they do.
No, I do agree with that. And I think in the FIA's defense, there is better communication now than there was several years ago as to why certain decisions are being made. And when it comes to track limits, Michael Massey, the race director, I admire his consistent hard stance on track limits. And I think it's only right, mainly because to actually stay within the confines of the track, it is more of a skill for the drivers. And I want to see the drivers stretched to the utmost here. They're all out there exceeding track limits because it's easier to take the corner faster that way. But I like the way Michael Massey has at least got a handle on track limits. I would suspect that part of the problem of not policing track limits at every corner is that it's just a very difficult thing to police unless you have a gazillion cameras and a lot of people to make those judgments. Whether the FIA have the, shall we say, the infrastructure to do that, I'm not quite sure at the moment. We'd have to ask Michael Massey about that one. But I do take your point on track limits. The one thing that bugs me is why at some corners the curb is the track limit and some corners it's the white line.
Yeah.
You know, I'll tell you what, let's go to the Super Bowl next year. We've got a few Americans on this call, so we'll put it into NFL terms. Let's go to the Super Bowl and let's have the first touchdown scored when you're 3 meters before the end zone, and then see how that works, shall we? Right, Dave, do you want to make another point? This was your point to start off with. Make your final point about the FIA and policing the sport.
Well, I think track limits takes it to a whole new world where they start changing the limit midway through the weekend. Now, I play the F1 game on the Xbox. I'm not very good at it, but I try.
Yeah, join the club.
It takes me many, many laps to learn a track. And eventually I can kind of put in a reasonable time. But if I go over the track limit, the time doesn't count. It's just deleted. And for the real drivers, I think who are really honing their craft, as you say, it's a harder skill to stay within the limits. To then say, oh, well, too many people found it too hard to stay on the track at turn 7, so we're just moving the limit out slightly. To me, that's like, oh, we're going to make the pockets wider at snooker, or we're going to make the goal bigger at football. I'm like, isn't the point of this sport that you have to be the best?
I think there are a lot of people around the world agreeing with everything that Dave has just said there. I'm going to pass some of this on to Michael Massey when I see him next and see what he says in terms of a comeback here, because I think it's actually really good to get a bit of research on this and to ask the fans what they think about the way their sport is being policed. Dave, thank you very much for that one. We're going to go to Nick next. Nick has got a point to make, so change the subject for us, Nick.
Okay, so there's a lot of rule changes coming in next year, obviously, with ground effect and the 18-inch rims and everything. And you get the impression that the FIA, the sport, wants to improve the show for the audience and so on. So I think we can probably look back on the hybrid era as it stands now, as it's been pretty much consistent for the past 7 years, and kind of ask the question, has it gone well? Have the last several years of Formula One lived up to what we want as a sport? Or, you know, did the FIA maybe bring all those massive changes in too quickly in 1 year? And maybe it would have been a better idea to do it gradually over several years. I'm just interested in what other people's opinions on that are, because I kind of look back on it and understand a lot of the reasons why the hybrid era started. But I do feel that to a certain extent, the racing did suffer and the show did suffer for it. not this year, actually. This has been, I think, the best year of the hybrid era so far with the races that we've had. But yeah, that's the question, really. What do we think now of these first 7 years of the hybrid era? Now it's kind of coming to an end with all the changes for next year.
Well, I don't know. Let's have some hands raised and see what people think about this one. Back in 2013, I got the feeling things were closing up a bit, the last year of the old V8s. And it's often the way, isn't it? Before we have a major regulation change, things get closer on the grid. Now, I'm not saying we don't need a regulation change for next year, but it certainly seems to be a lot closer than it was. Right. Stanford and Michael and Bobby and Stephanie, you can get involved in a couple of moments, but Dave had his hand up first. So what do you reckon, Dave?
Well, for me personally, this hybrid era has really been my coming back to F1. I hadn't been a fan for a long time. Then one Sunday afternoon, we had a friend round. We put the F1 on, and myself and my girlfriend fell in love with the sport. So
good.
I think
Well
it's
done.
been successful.
Hopefully you fell in love with each other as well.
We were already in love. She's as much of a fan as I am. And so I would try and tease out the fact that Mercedes and Hamilton have been so good from the hybrid era as a whole. And when I think back to Silverstone, was it 2015, where the Williams shot off into the distance?
When the Williams actually led for about 22 laps.
Yeah, some of those races, even during the hybrid era, have been amazing. And so I think it's done well. For sure, there has been one dominant team, which is possibly mostly because they got the engine so right so soon, and their customer teams benefited as well. We've lost some teams along the way, and I think that is a bit of a shame because the costs of competing are now so high. Could the cost cap have come in sooner? Maybe, but overall, I think F1's in a better state now. Like when I think of our weekend watching it now compared to 5 years ago, 6 years ago, I think it's been a success.
I tend to agree with you on that one. Good point, Dave. Michael, what do you think?
Yeah, Crofty. So I think the next question kind of dovetails into what I'm going to be asking later, but not to jump ahead. I really want to respect next question. I'm a newer fan. So I've been a fan maybe for 2 years. And I think on this panel here, I'm kind of the newbie. I was hoping, I've heard the hybrid era a couple different times, and that's over my head. I'm wondering if you could kind of define that really quick for us newbie fans.
So any time from the start of the 2014 season onwards. So when we said goodbye to the old V8 engines that made lots of noise, and then we brought in the new hybrid engine. So the V6 1.6 litre turbos with the ERS as well. So it's anything from the start of 2014, or to put it bluntly, when Lewis and Mercedes started doing well.
There you go. Thank you for clarifying that.
Anytime. But as a newbie to the sport, you're okay with what you've seen so far?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
Excellent. Mark, what do you think?
You know what? I'm going to kind of take this from a slightly different angle. Not necessarily the hybrid era, but the amount of reporting, storytelling, and understanding of the personalities that we've had in the last few years. Thanks to people like yourself, Crofty. Going behind the scenes in Formula One is absolutely magical because you actually see the humanity that is there, as well as the incredible sport and competition. So for me, it's kind of less about maybe the rules next year, the rules this year, the hybrid era, but it's how, as a fan of F1, you can really get involved into the sport in more ways than just watching the race.
Absolutely, which is where the people of F1 Experiences come in, because one of the things I love about the, shall we say, the Liberty era of Formula One is the way that watching F1 behind the scenes tours, you can talk to Bernd Mailander, the safety car driver, some of the drivers as well in Champions Club that pop in from time to time to go on truck tours around the track. We're going to France soon, and a few years ago in France, there I was doing a little early evening jog around the track where I suddenly got heckled by 2 truckloads of F1 Experiences hospitality customers who decided to abuse me just because I was sweating massively going through the final few turns. That is how close you can get to the action now. And if you haven't checked out the F1 Experiences website yet, I urge you to do so because that's where all the details are. But Stephanie, what do you think? Do you think that there's too much dominance from one team at the moment? Do you think that this era has been good for Formula One or what?
Well, I'm a new fan as well. My fiance turned me on to it in 2018, so I'm a newbie as well. But I sort of did a deep dive on the history with, the history of it. There's a meme. I follow a lot of Facebook, F1 pages, and there's a meme with a picture of, like Batman getting ready to hit the red button, and the red button says "End Mercedes dominance," right? And we're all kind of going, because I'm a Ferrari fan, and we affectionately call what happened with the engine the cheaty bits, the ephemeral cheaty bits. Yeah, we don't know. We don't talk about the cheaty bits, but we know that they existed, and we saw what happened afterwards. So clearly there was something, but not having the experience of well, when we were in Austin, we saw the legacy races and those engines. Oh my gosh, that's an amazing sound, the old V12s. But beyond that, I don't have much personal experience other than I want to push the red button in Mercedes dominance. Come on, people.
Okay, Bobby C, you seem like a man steeped in F1 history, so you can help Stephanie here, right? Has this turbo hybrid era been a good era for F1, or were there better eras before?
See, Crofty and Stephanie, I'd like to believe that when we look back at Formula One, I really enjoy looking back at the beginning of Formula One, because those are the gladiators. Those are the drivers that risk their lives to compete in this sport. Now, I firmly believe that when you look back at the history of Formula One, you should appreciate all of the different eras. I think the V10s, the V8s, the V6s, when we all look back, there's something to appreciate from every single era. But for me, if we were going to talk about, and that could be a separate point on our show today, if we were going to talk about the all-time greats, I often look to the drivers that came before me. When I put my Mount Rushmore together, I'm taking some of those drivers from the very beginning of the sport because of what they had to risk, and that was their lives to compete in Formula One.
That's a very good point, actually, which brings me to, I've just been doing my notes for Baku today. They're right by me here. These are my notes for Baku, or some of them anyway. And Sunday, race day, is the anniversary of Jim Clark's Formula One debut in the 1960 Dutch Grand Prix. The reason I know that is because Esteban Ocon is making his 73rd start on Sunday, which actually passes the career total of Jim Clark, the two-time world champion. Now, when you're putting your Mount Rushmore together, Bobby C, Jim Clark's got to be on.
Well, absolutely. And that's a great reference, Crofty. I mean, that was someone that was roommates with Sir Jackie Stewart. And, I got an opportunity to speak with him on our show here in the United States. And, for me, Jim Clark's got to be on your all-time top four, one of the greatest drivers of all time. And I know the younger generation today will talk about someone like Lewis Hamilton or Michael Schumacher. And of course, statistically, those are two of the greatest of all time. But it's very easy as time goes by for us to forget about some of the notables that have come before us. And that's why you need to read books. You need to go back and look at footage. Someone like Fangio, I mean, you look at these drivers when you go on YouTube and you find some of this all-time footage, and they're driving around in T-shirts, Crofty. I mean, if there's one shunt, if there's one crash, that could mean your life. And I'm not trying to knock the drivers of today or the engines of today, but I think for me, maybe as an historian of Formula One, I love to look back at some of these great drivers and just pay them the respect. I think of a book. I don't know how many of you have ever read the book, The Cruel Sport. It actually is one of the first Formula One books from the early 1960s. It's a kind of a vintage book. I own it. And it just to show some of the pictures, it actually has a lot of great photos of Jim Clark and Sterling Moss and some of the drivers that, like I said, I think the operative word for them is gladiators when I think of them in the sport.
Absolutely. Gladiators today, gladiators of the past as well, and very brave souls that they were too. Bobby C, thank you very much indeed. Stanford, I know you got your hand up. The F1 Experiences Fancast with Crofty here and my friends from around the world. But Stanford, I need to move on to a different topic. So I tell you what, why don't you set the next topic, sir? What do you want to say?
Well, when I was communicating with in the email, I actually bring up I was really looking forward to Monaco, but then I just wonder, is there anything can it be done to really kind of spice up the Sunday race? It's really
Can we make Monaco better?
I was talking with a friend in the gym, and I kind of found some new F1 fans here, and we are talking about it, and you're looking forward to so much adrenaline and the excitement, but then it come that Sunday, just so the race was won on Saturday. I don't know if these.
Well, no, the race was lost on Saturday when Charles Leclerc sadly went and crashed into the barriers. I tell you what, let's do a quick straw poll here. Hands raised physically. You can take your virtual hand down, Stanford. Who enjoyed the Monaco Grand Prix? Put your hand up if you enjoyed watching the Monaco Grand Prix. Wow, that's 5 more than I thought, to be fair. I thought it was a tad processional, to be fair. There were stories. It was a great outcome in terms of the championship. The results certainly was very exciting. However, yes, you had that constant battle with the barriers that every driver goes through, but I want to see a bit more action in my Formula One races, and we didn't get it. And I'm not talking about overtaking for overtaking's sake. To me, you want to make Monaco better, I'd do 2 things that cost little or no money whatsoever that really would spice it up. And virtual hands up if you want to respond to this. First and foremost, mandatory 2 pit stops. Because it's an easy 1-stop race. So let's have mandatory 2 pit stops. So at least you get some different strategy. And secondly, I would ban blue flags for this race just to see it and just to see what happens. Because what you would get is laps or cars about to be lapped, trying to get out, not trying to get out of the way because they have to, but holding up the leaders and creating a concertina effect. And then let's see what happens after that. Stephanie.
You mean kind of like what Mazepin was doing?
Yeah, well, yeah, but he doesn't do it deliberately. He just sadly, what happened with Nikita Mazepin is that before the start of the season, somebody actually painted his mirrors, his wing mirrors, black, so he can't see any cars behind him. I don't know if you know this at all about him, but he's totally unaware that there's anyone anywhere near him. No, I'm being harsh. I'm being harsh on Nikita Mazepin. Just for comic effect. Yeah, Mazepin, as he is sometimes called. Yeah, so what do you reckon, Stephanie? Would blue flags spice up Monaco, or a lack of blue flags?
An interesting proposition, Crofty, because I mean, we assume and we know, blue flag, get out of the way. That is a really interesting proposition because clearly you're going to slow down, the lapping on the head of the pack because now they've got to navigate around these, folks that they're lapping, and it would add an element of danger because things happen. So, that's a very interesting proposition, really.
And it doesn't cost a thing. Right, Nick, what do you think?
Until the car crashes.
Until the car crashes. And then it does cost rather a lot. Do you know how much Gunther Steiner came out and said Mick Schumacher's crash in FP3? $500,000 US, according to Gunther Steiner. That's a lot of crash. Right there and then in a cost cap world. Nick, what do you reckon?
I was going to say next year with the changes to the rules, where with the ground effect, and they should be able to follow a lot closer. That hopefully that will improve Monaco a tad, like being able to come out of the tunnel closer with the guy in front. You might be able to get down the side because at the moment with the current aero packages on the cars, it's impossible, and Monaco is impossible to overtake on virtually anyway. And the tunnel is one of the only places where you can do it, but they can't get close enough, and they haven't been able to get close enough for many years. So fingers crossed, next year's changes with ground effect and less aero coming off the car should hopefully improve it a bit.
Excellent point, well made. Hayden, what do you say?
So going off of what Nick was saying, I think one of the big issues with Monaco is obviously the fact that the cars are really big these days. They're the size of SUVs in terms of length. It's difficult to really navigate the tight corners of Monaco so frequently. Now, obviously, with next year's regulation changes, we're getting smaller cars. And I'm thinking that maybe we might be able to get closer racing with that. But as you saw, there weren't a whole lot of on-track overtakes, and I do think that the size of the cars does play a factor in that. Like, yes, you had Mick overtaking Nikita through the hairpin, and then you had parts of Pierre and Seb going at it, but then, well, Lance happened.
It was so exciting. The director didn't want to show it.
I was really looking forward to that. I was like, oh, we're going to see him going wheel to wheel up to the casino square. And then We got Lance instead.
Yeah, you were looking forward to that. Hayden, I was commentating at the time. I was looking forward to seeing what was going to happen on that one, but the Monegasque director thought we needed another replay of Lance Stroll. Possibly one of the highlights for fans throughout the course of the year, but not for the reason the director intended. It's the width of the cars, isn't it? The Formula E cars, lots of overtaking there because they're narrower, and that action was superb there. But the F1 cars a little bit wider. That's the problem. Dave, what do you think?
Yeah, so I think Hayden nailed it with the car width. I was going to say banning blue flags might not help as much as we hope, just because if there isn't much space to overtake, if the car in front of you has to slow down or not, if they can't get out of the way, it doesn't matter too much. But I do like the idea of an extra mandatory pit stop. And maybe you can spice that up further by restricting tyre compounds to make sure that not only do you have to do it for the rule, but your car performance will fall off if you don't take it. But other than that, maybe you just have to accept that over a Formula One season, some tracks are about fast speed, some tracks are about cornering performance, and some are about 80-something laps of not making even the slightest, tiniest mistake, or else you're out.
That's a really good point. Monaco, there is a lot to still marvel at in terms of F1 at Monaco. It's a stupid idea. Would never get created today, but it is well worth watching, and you should go and watch it live. It's incredible to see the cars live around Monaco. It's a very different race. I don't, for one, think it should ever be taken off the calendar. I love going to Monaco. I love seeing what the drivers can do there. I just want to see the drivers given a chance for a bit of overtaking. And I think you would get overtaking with that blue flag idea. But when you get up to the midfield runners and trying to lap them, then it becomes a little bit difficult. I tell you what, I've had an idea, Mark. We could introduce the Valtteri Bottas rule, where you have to leave one tyre on your car for the rest of the race, and you can change the other three. That would help it.
Totally. I was going to say let's mix the compounds, but that can be a bit dramatic sometimes.
It's the Valtteri Bottas rule. It's done. What was the point? What was the actual point you wanted to make?
I was just going to agree that Monaco is one of a rich series of Formula One races, and we see something different and learn something new at each racetrack. And I think that's part of the joy of Formula One compared to NASCAR or any other motorsport where you just see people go around in ovals. I mean, that's the skill of the driver, which we're seeing come through there. And I think it's a really special place to continue to hold the Formula One.
Michael, final say goes to you.
Yeah, no, I wanted to dovetail on Dave's point and also on Mark's point as well with Monaco. I mean, I think what's so special, even though I've been really watching this and really drinking this in for the last 2 years, I mean, obviously as a child, every once in a while you're seeing this on TV, and Monaco has been a thing forever, right? And so there's a ton of respect, there's a ton of tradition with Formula One and Monaco, and to be able to watch that, because we watched it from beginning to end last week, and literally it was so like, to Dave's point, he called it a technical race. Like it wasn't all out. You're not overtaking speed, but it was very technical, and you had to be very precise with all of your movements. And I think I get a new appreciation for how much value that pit crew is adding when you watch Bottas go in there, and you're watching these like 2.8 seconds, 3.2 seconds. I mean, super fast, and like watching Bottas like 5 seconds, 6, and like I felt it in my stomach. I felt for him. It was just like the race was over after 9 or 10 seconds because there was no chance possible that he could make up that time. It was incredible to see. And it was like back to that technical aspect of the race. I mean, if every race were like that, I'm not sure it would be a sustainable product per se, but for that one experience, I mean, it was really special to see that, it's one thing to get pole, right? It's another to keep it, right? Because like you were saying, Stephanie, it's like you still have to drive the car to the finish line. You still got to get there. So it was a great race.
Charles Leclerc, one of 5 drivers in Formula One to take pole position and then fail to start a race. And the first since Jarno Trulli on the 19th of June, 2005 at Indianapolis for very different circumstances. Thank you very much, Stanford. Marvellous point that you wanted to introduce to everyone. Where should we go now? Bobby C. Bobby C, what do you want to say?
Well, Crofty, I'm here to tell everyone that it's time for us to find an American driver that can compete and win a championship in Formula One. And Crofty, you know what? If we can find the next voice of Formula One in you in a bar in Las Vegas, Nevada, you can definitely find the next great Formula One champion right here in New York. I think there's, either in New York or in the United States, there are plenty of talented American drivers that really have no clear path to success in Formula One. And I was hoping that we could talk about it today, because to me, the feeder series for Formula One, and I don't know if all of you would agree, should be IndyCar, because there's no Americans in F2. I think at last check, when I had looked it up, there are 3 that are in F3. And to me, the most promising young prospect that I've seen so far is Colton Herta, who was on the front row in this weekend's Indianapolis 500. Unfortunately, started strong, led a few laps, and did not end up finishing the way that he wanted to. He finished 16th, but he's just 21 years old. He won at COTA in IndyCar, 18 at the time when he did that, youngest to do that. He raced in Britain in 2015. He was actually in the Euro Formula Open Championship in 2016. And he knows some of the F1 tracks, which I think is a big part of this. He's raced at Spa. He's raced at the Red Bull Ring. He's raced at Silverstone and Monza and Barcelona and Paul Ricard. And I mean, guys, I'm sure we're talking about, me being like the historian here on the show, because traditionalist here. I'm sure many of you know who this is. This, of course, is the last Formula One champion, and that is Mario Andretti. And that came 43 years ago, 1978. This is the last American to not only win the F1 championship, but actually win a Grand Prix. And he says that he sees himself in Colton Herta. So to me, if we're looking at maybe the greatest, at least American champion, and arguably one of the greatest F1 drivers of all time, I mean, I think you could probably consider putting Mario Andretti on your Mount Rushmore of great F1 drivers. If he says that he sees something in Colton Herta, then I think we should at least consider, trying to have, again, I think the operative word, I use operative as the key here. Operative word is opportunity. I think that's something that we've talked about a lot lately in Formula One, whether it's Lewis Hamilton talking about trying to create pathways, opportunities for drivers of color. I think we've already seen other conversations in Formula One about, potentially having females on the grid at some point. I mean, that's something that we should have. And I think we should also try to create a pathway to have more Americans be in Formula One too.
Toto Wolff has come out this week and said that it needs too much money to get into Formula One, and it does. And look, let's not beat around the bush. It's not like football. You can't just go for a kick around in your backyard and pretend to be a Formula One driver. You are going to need money to get through the feeder series. But I do think it is up to the Formula One teams to invest in talent a lot more than they currently do. Now, Red Bull aside, Mercedes aside, Ferrari aside, Renault, Alpine, I should say, have their young driver academies. But, Gene Haas has Haas F1, has an American team. What is Gene Haas doing to bring an American Formula One driver or American Formula One driver of the future through? He's not, he's teaming up with the Russians, which I know has been quite an American thing to do in the Trump era. But, nowadays, let's change this a bit. Stephanie, why are you shaking your head there? It was a cheap gag and I wasn't going to resist it.
You can't. No, but Bobby made a great point, and that's what I wanted to say as far as more female representation. Absolutely. In F2, what was it, 2019? We had Tatiana Calderon. She was in the bottom of the pack, didn't get as much coverage, but at least she was on the grid. I mean, and she was consistently, 18th, 19th, but yeah, I was laughing because you were like, what is Gene Haas doing? And it's like, just stop there. What is he doing?
He's having a good time, and he's in Formula One, and he's in Formula One for the foreseeable, and the business model works for Gene Haas. But I want to see American drivers come through. Pato O'Ward, I think, has got an F1 test at the end of the season. And I know he's Mexican, but he is a massive Formula One fan, and also a very talented driver as well. And I agree with Bobby's point. There is a lot of talent in IndyCar. That young Castro Neves chap, he's not bad as well, to be fair. Which should be given the chance to come through. The FIA could encourage, by giving more super license points to winners of series in America, could encourage American drivers to come over. Historically, you need you need to be taking part in the Euro F3s, the F4 championships, the Formula Alpine championships. You might need to move from America over to Europe. But there's enough spaces on the grid for a potential couple of new teams as well. And Michael, I'll come to you in a minute because you're in advertising and you can tell us what the sponsors want over in America on that one. But Nick, you've got a point first.
There it is.
Yeah, just on the broadest topic of getting more diversity in drivers, the one thing I think they should do is ban pay drivers. If it were possible at all.
No. Wrong.
No?
Why would you ban pay drivers?
Huh?
Why would you ban pay drivers?
Well, but ban that. It seems to be a lot of the time that a lot of the drivers, I think Lewis said it the other day about the billionaire boys.
Mm-hmm.
It's stop them making it so easy for them to be drivers, because it does seem to me that a lot of the time there's a lot of talent going to waste, and sometimes less talented drivers might get Formula One drives because of their paychecks rather than their talent, and that's the thing that I think a lot of people realize. It's an expensive sport. It's got to be paid for, obviously, but I do think there could be some better regulations or rules in place to maybe put the lid on that a bit, and that might allow a bit more diversity, more working class people to come into it, as you say, more people from other countries, female drivers, that kind of thing.
Look, I see your point. I shouted you down too quickly. You made a very good point in the end there. But what I always say about pay drivers, if you have a downer on drivers that pay their way into the sport, then Niki Lauda, who brought a substantial budget with him when he first started, would never have got into Formula One. So it doesn't mean you haven't got talent just because you're bringing money. Lance Stroll, for instance, is a 3-time podium finisher. He is the second youngest guy to ever be on the front row, second youngest podium finisher as well. And I think is turning into a very good driver indeed. Nikita Mazepin, give him time. I'm sure he will come through and show what he can do as well. And don't forget, these drivers have won races. In Lance Stroll's case, he's won championships as well to get into Formula One. But it is an expensive sport. And that's where you go back to the teams, for me, need to do more to bring the drivers through. So, look, you've only got 20 seats. And it's very difficult to get an equal split across those 20 seats. That's why you need more teams in Formula One to bring in more opportunity for people. But why can you not run young rookies? Why can you not have an experienced driver and a rookie at every team? And at every team, you bring drivers through. If you've got enough seats on the grid, you could make that work. And I'm thinking off the top of my head a little bit on this one. But if you expand it out and have more seats and you create more opportunities, we can bring our American drivers. We can bring Afro-Caribbean drivers through as well. Because when Lewis Hamilton first started winning championships, there was a huge uptake in terms of karting and people from black and ethnic minority backgrounds wanting to go karting because they've seen Lewis Hamilton succeeding on the track and they want to go and emulate his hero. It would be the same. You get a female driver on the grid, you then get a huge uptake in women wanting to go karting as well. Doesn't happen overnight, this sort of thing, but create the pyramid and have the spaces at the top, and eventually we'll get there. That to me is the hope. Right, I said Michael, you're in advertising. Why are the advertisers, why are the sponsors not putting money into American drivers to come over to F1?
There's so many different points here. Like the fact that it all boils down, you made that perfect point, with only 20 seats and I was doing a little bit of Googling, trying to prep myself, with 91 million fans. I mean, this is such a massive base of fans and such a massive product that's being put on that track. And so much talent filtering down to only 20 seats. And I have to fess up, some of my fanhood came from the Netflix series that started 2 years ago. And, kind of talking to the point that was just made where, it seems like maybe it was called the Billionaire Boys Club or whatever that is, but it seems like if you show up with enough money, you can get your son in an F1 seat. And I'm not sure how much that is true. Also with heritage too, is Schumacher one of the best premier drivers to be taking up one of those precious 20 seats right now, or is he there because of his dad? I don't know. But that's a great point. And then the other side of the coin is, what's the Indy product compared? Is that filling the need here in the States? Is that really satisfying that hunger for those of us here in the States? For me, obviously not, because I'm a huge F1 fan now. And I love that. And I'm not as well versed in the IndyCar circuit, but I appreciate what they're doing, and not to rain on Bobby's parade, right? I love what they're doing, and to maybe see that as almost like, using a baseball analogy here that may not carry over the pond, right? But, here in Major League Baseball, we've got minor league baseball, you've got AAA, AA. You've kind of got that pathway, that kind of path that feeds you there. And it seems like our drivers here just don't have that path, but it doesn't mean that we can't start creating that path. And you brought up that great point of having, Gene Haas here in the United States, and what could be doing here. That might be a great point to forward this podcast or this program over to Gene right after this and be like, hey, have you even considered that? Because that would be the most obvious, here we are, because that's going to come up on my topic when I bring that up, is like, it's not like they're finishing top 3 every race right now. So why not mix it up a little bit? Why not bring in some hometown talent and take it international and see what happens?
Good point, Michael. Thank you very much indeed. Bobby and Dave, I would come to you now, but we need to take a quick pause. And here is the best segue you will ever hear on the F1 Experiences Fancast with Crofty, from a man in advertising to a few words from our sponsors. F1 Experiences gets you closer to Formula One than ever before. Ensure you get the most out of your Grand Prix weekend with an official ticket package from F1 Experiences, which include VIP trackside hospitality, behind-the-scenes access, and the chance to meet some of the sport's biggest names. Secure your access today by visiting f1experiences.com. Welcome back to the F1 Experiences Fancast with me, Crofty. That's the second take of that one. You won't have seen the first. It really was that bad. We are pushed for time. And Stephanie, we need to come to you next because you've got patients waiting to see you. You've actually put people off with genuine medical complaints to talk Formula One. Therefore, you are fan of the week as far as I'm concerned. This is absolute dedication to the cause. But what was the point you wanted to make today?
Well, I did want to talk about the 2022 regulations. We've kind of touched upon that. And so I think what I find exciting is the cost cap, because I think that that's really going to hopefully kind of shrink the field and the midfield and make them a bit more competitive. Because if we don't have unlimited budgets, we're looking at you, Mercedes, then maybe Williams, Haas, some of those, do you say lower echelon, best of the rest? Like, how do we,
lower midfield,
low pack teams, right? I just feel like they'll have more of a chance if the budget, and at first when the budget cap was discussed, our heads exploded. I was like, oh my gosh, what about the driver salaries? What about this? What about that? That's excluded. Don't worry about it. We're just talking about vehicle development, right? Mm-hmm. And I think that's brilliant. I mean, sure, let's phase out the wind tunnel. Do we really need it? That's another discussion. But, let's make the cost more competitive for everybody. And let's see what happens to the grid. I find that really exciting.
Do you want to see the cost cap result in a much closer grid no matter what? So as long
what
as...
do you mean no matter what?
Well, because one of the things that the cost cap might do is bring on redundancies. Mm-hmm. Teams might not be able to have as many people working for them. There are downsides to this. And I think Mercedes, Ferrari, Red Bull, to name the 3 biggest teams, part of their reluctance is they don't want to be shedding workforce in this one. But is the end result the actual be all and end all here, that what we need is a much closer sport? And maybe those that, might lose their jobs, well, let's bring in a couple of new teams and they can find their way at those new teams. And I'm oversimplifying what is a horrific thing to lose your job here. And I don't want to see mass redundancies, but there is that downside to it.
I'm skeptical that that's going to happen. I mean, with all of the sporting regulation changes, the parts, reclassifying, the parts that are going to be standardized, I don't know.
One thing that I think goes hand in hand with the cost cap, and I'll get everyone else to come in on this one as well, is the reduction in wind tunnel time and the reduction in CFD time as well. So you've got less money to spend and you've got less time to research that as well, and less, terabytes in which to research that. That, to me, has the biggest impact of them all. And I think you might already be seeing signs of it this season. Take, for instance, Mercedes, who say no big upgrades for the rest of this year. There'll be a few tweaks here and there, but basically what is on the car now is what's going to stay on the car for the rest of the year. And you think, well, how can that be? We're already 5 races into it. But Mercedes are going to lose the most amount of wind tunnel time because they were the champions. They are hamstrung by the cost cap, of course. And they had the big Valtteri Bottas crash, which was about $1.4 million worth of damage when he crashed with George Russell. So that all comes out of the development budget for the rest of this year. Plus, 2022 is such a big year in terms of regulation changes. They need to be focusing on that and can't necessarily focus so much on this year as well. So we might already see signs later on this year that the cost cap and the reductions in wind tunnel time are working. Personally, I think it's a really exciting thing for the future, and I hope that we don't get big redundancies in the sport as well. I'm taking it right up to 5 o'clock UK time, 9 o'clock where you are, Stephanie, as well. I believe you now have patients to go and attend to.
I do. Thank you so much, Crofty. It's been great.
Round of applause for Stephanie, who has to leave us.
Thanks, Steph.
Thank you, Steph. It's been great having you on today. Right, that leaves us with 7 now, because Steph's got to go off and do really important things while we talk about Formula One for the rest of the afternoon. So let's do that with Hayden. Hayden, what is the point you want to make? Hayden, you've got to turn your microphone on. It's the first
probably help.
The red light's not on. No one's going to hear you.
So I want to talk about this year's title fight. Obviously, after this most recent round in Monaco, Max Verstappen and Red Bull are now leading the championship, something that they haven't done since, I believe, 2013.
Correct.
Do we think that Red Bull will continue to have the upper hand, or will Mercedes claw back with a passion just unseen before in the previous seasons? Do we think that, or do we think potentially another team could come in and do something in these coming seasons, or races, I should say?
Nick was straight in there with the speed of Valtteri Bottas off the line. I mean, that was incredible, sir, that reaction time.
I know I've been talking about this to my friend who I watch every Formula One race with quite a lot. So I think Lewis is one of the best Formula One drivers in the world. If he has any kind of weakness, sometimes it's when he's been put under pressure, and there's more of a psychological thing going on there. I think if Max can leverage that properly, he can win it. I don't think it's going to come down to, I think the cars are pretty much evenly matched across the rest of this season. So there's 2 things for me. Can Max get under Lewis's head psychologically? And secondly, how well will Valtteri and Checo do as the number 2 drivers? Because they're going to need going forward, I think. They're going to be very important as it comes down to the wire. But why I'm so excited about this season is because right now I don't know. Whereas in other seasons, you could probably go, oh, it's Lewis's, oh, it's so-and-so. Really, for the first time, this one, I don't know, and I don't think any of us do, and that's why it's great.
Yeah, you see, I'm kind of with Nick on this one. The fact that it's all so wide open at the moment is absolutely brilliant. And I think you, Nick, are not alone in the way that you're thinking, and that uncertainty and that close competition and that those close battles and the variety potentially of winners for this season is driving more and more people towards the sport, which is absolutely superb. Bobby C, what do you say?
Well, I mean, we've talked about it so far today. I mean, you're obviously rooting for parity and diversity sometimes, but at the same time, even with Formula One, if you're going to have that great story of just the 2 battling at the top in F1, I mean, that in and of itself could be, fantastic for the entire series. So for me, I'm okay with, if we're not going to have, let's say, some of the drivers from the back maybe really competing, if that's the storyline the rest of the year, Max and Lewis, I mean, what a great storyline that would be. And even for someone that has a Still I Rise tattoo on my arm and a lot of love for Lewis Hamilton, I think this might be Max's year.
Yeah.
What are you going to put on the other arm if Max becomes champion then? You got Still I Rise. You going to have what? Max Performance on the other arm?
I got Crofty. I got Ride or Die on my other arm. Like I said, legends and Ride or Die. That's what we're all about.
Oh, I love it. We're going to have to find some space. Maybe just put Max on your forehead. That's what you
That's space there.
Yeah, you haven't got a Verstappen there, but you've got a Max. That's absolutely fine. Dave, what do you think?
Sorry to pop the bubble, but I think we're all overlooking something quite important there.
We are.
Lewis is a great driver. Max is a talented driver. I don't dispute that. I think Lewis can handle pressure. You don't win so many titles by accident. But even putting that aside, yes, the Red Bull is better this year. That Mercedes has been a very reliable car for the last 6-7 years. So even if the Red Bull is a more competitive car this year, that whole team has seriously got to up its reliability game if they want to fight for the title. And I like the point made around the second drivers as well. That's going to come into it. But the car's got to do the season. Hopefully it will be a long season with lots of races and not too many cancellations. So I think still Mercedes are the team to beat. I think Red Bull being faster by itself is not enough. They are also going to have seriously improved across the board.
87 out of his last 88 starts, Lewis Hamilton has scored points, and he has scored in his last 54 race starts in a row, which, as you well know, is a record for Formula One. See, I knew doing these notes before I went to Baku would come in handy.
That's not just
today.
Lewis, Crofty. That's not just Lewis being good.
Correct.
That is hundreds of people being excellent at what they do, delivering that for it. So the Red Bull going faster hasn't made all those people less good at their jobs suddenly.
It's a very good point you make there, Dave. Stanford, what do you say?
I want to kind of second what Nick said about Bottas. I think he's been sort of a non-factor, but I do think he's going to probably play, kind of take the points of the two of them. And in the end, that maybe end up falling into Mercedes' hand, because I don't really see Checo be able to deliver. I mean, like Monaco, had that incident not happen for Bottas, he would have been in the front. So I do think, he's not really been have a great season so far, but I do think there may be some few races that they may fall into his lap, and in that way be able to somehow either take some points off Max Verstappen, I would think. So in that can play into Lewis's hand.
I think Valtteri Bottas is hugely underrated for Mercedes. You look at this season, every time he's finished third. But he had the DNF in Imola, of course, with the crash with George Russell, and he had the DNF in Monaco with the wheel. He has been runner-up over the last 2 years. There's no shame in being runner-up to a 7-time world champion. He scores points. He is consistent. And at the moment, has more consistency than Checo does with the Red Bull. But, Checo's in a brand new team here and is still struggling to adapt to a car that Max knows full well and is quite intimate with, but Checo just needs to build up that relationship. It will come, and then to the second half of the season, we'll really start to see Checo, I think, making a massive contribution. Not that he hasn't already. I'm going back to my notes here, ladies and gentlemen, because I wrote this down. 44 points after 5 races. Alex Albon had 36 after 5 in 2020. Gasly had 21 after 5 in 2019. So in terms of wanting someone to score more points, Red Bull have already brought in a guy that has been able to do that. But yeah, we'll see the two, I don't want to call them number twos, the two teammates to Max and Lewis having quite an influence, I think, on this championship the longer it goes on. Right, last point on this goes to Mark.
Hey, Crofty, I was just thinking that, what are Mercedes going to do when things continue not to go their way? And we could see that happening this season, right? Red Bull are on the ascendance. They've got great team spirit, great drivers, as we just went through. When they're going to look to shake things up a little bit more than they're doing at the moment, when they're going to look to put George in Bottas's seat and see what happens?
Well, I don't know. I love the way, Mark, that what a Mercedes going to do when things don't go their way. They trail by a point in the Constructors' Championship. It's hardly a landslide, sir. But I do take your point, given what we've seen over recent years. I don't know what they're going to do in the future with 3 drivers all out of contract at the end of this year. 3 into 2 doesn't go. Despite what Meatloaf once tried to sing about. I wouldn't be at all surprised if you don't see Lewis or George together. I wouldn't be at all surprised if it's Lewis or Valtteri. I think Toto's got a very difficult choice to make. The key is, where do you place Valtteri or George if they're not going to be in that Mercedes seat for next year? I don't see George going to Aston Martin, which would be the logical team to make the step up. I'm discounting Esteban Ocon, and I potentially shouldn't do that either, because Ocon's a fine driver and still very much in that Mercedes stable. the fact that it's worked with Lewis and Valtteri for quite a while now, and the fact that Mercedes have been winning both championships during that time, makes me think that, well, they might just stay as it is, because, you know, why break something that doesn't need fixing? But you've also got to look to the future as well. George is the future purely because he's younger, not that Valtteri's an old man. It's a really tough choice, and I'm glad I'm not Toto Wolff and having to make this choice, quite frankly. There are many things about Toto Wolff I would love, you know, his paycheck being one of them, and the fact that he gets to sit in the back of the garage and talk to whoever he wants on the radio. But then I talk to millions of people around the world, so he probably wants my job as well. Right, let's move on, shall we? Mark, as we were talking to you, let's hear your point for the afternoon.
Super good. Thank you, Crofty. Well, I'm interested in discussing how performance has changed in F1 across the years and how kind of the fans feel about that. It seems that today, tyre management is up there against driver skill, is one of the most critical factors along with race strategy. And I'm interested in the team's views on, you know, how to improve the sport compared to the past. Today, it's not always about the best driver that wins. It's about the best team. And if you go back to the days of, you know, Senna, Mansell and Prost, we just didn't see the same strategic strengths and the driver skill shone through. So just interested to hear people's opinions.
Okay, let's hear some people's opinions on this one. It is a team sport. Do we see more team involvement than we ever did before? Or was it always like this? Nick, I don't believe that you watched Formula One before the 1990s. You don't look old enough, sir, but go on.
So I assure you, unfortunately, I am just about, I started watching it in the late 80s. It's always been a team sport, but I get the point that as the years have gone by, the technology has increased so much that it's become so much more important just because it's of the increase in it. And the more we go forward, I think the thing is, the Formula One drivers these days have to have a different set of skills from the Formula One drivers of, say, the 80s and 90s. So Ayrton's skill base is different from, say, Max's skill base, because Ayrton would drive around, you know, with a stick shift and a wheel with nothing on the wheel back in the 80s and that McLaren. And that was a different set of skills. Obviously, they're both good racing drivers, but now Max has to press about 30,000 buttons and understand, you know, all these different things. So it's different. I always hesitate when people say, oh, they were better drivers back then because the cars weren't as technologically, you know, and they had to do more. I don't think that's fair. I just think there's a different skill base over and above the natural ability to drive a car very fast, which is something very, very few people have got the talent or the guts to do. But yeah, so they've it's a different skill base from what it was, and I guess your mileage may vary on whether you prefer the drivers from the olden days or what's going on now. But I try and appreciate both sides of it, and like the fact that it's different. Yeah, so that, I guess that's where I come down on it. It's a different sport from the way it was all those years ago, and the cars are very different. Therefore, the drivers are too.
Meanwhile, in a retro corner of the Bronx, Bobby C has got his retro car right there in front of him on the desk, and he's going to tell me that it was so much better in the old days. Where's your rose-tinted glasses?
I was actually going to say, I think it's fair to just make the point that it's probably very difficult, almost impossible, to compare eras. You know, I think that's why I said earlier, you just try your best to appreciate all the different time periods that Formula One has gone through. And I know you weren't pleased with Monaco this year. I saw that you tweeted it out, but like we mentioned before, you know, you kind of understand certain aspects of the calendar. You understand certain aspects of the sport. And, you know, again, not trying to play traditionalist here, but I think there are certain things that go on with Formula One that, again, if you just understand the nature of the sport, you know, those are aspects of it that are going on right now. So, you know, Monaco is Monaco. There are going to be teams. There have always been elite teams in Formula One. And, you know, is it fair to change it? You could consider changing it, but I think, you know, you could also consider just leaving it be, because, again, you know, the sport has been great for 71 years and continues to be, regardless of you know, of the different eras.
Brilliant stuff, Bobby. Thank you very much. Dave, what do you think?
I was wondering about the impact of the technology, and for sure it's visible, but is that magnified by the fact that the margins are getting finer and finer and finer. So where maybe 20, 30 years ago, you could all build a car that was roughly the same and there'd be advantages. Williams would innovate cool new suspension, but the cars weren't quite so, let's say, precisely engineered. And now that they're into that real era of precision engineering, the impact of the technology looks so much finer, and you have to care about tire management because now you know that the other car is already excellent. And so if the other team care about tire management and you don't, they're going to beat you. So I think you can't drive the sport backwards. I wouldn't want to see any of the innovations go away. Do you remember a few years ago, they told the team radio rules that you weren't allowed to give the driver certain kinds of information, and it didn't help. It didn't make anything more exciting. It just led to confusion.
It got Kevin Magnussen a penalty, though, didn't it, in Hungary last year? You got to feel sorry for him on that one. I think he's the only one that's really come a cropper. But it did put more onus on the drivers, that team radio rule. Maybe we need to have less team radio during the course of the race. But it's difficult because for safety reasons, there's so much a driver needs to do now. As you guys have been saying, it's interesting. Look, we had a bit of a laugh at his expense earlier, and I'm going to now stick up for Nikita Mazepin. You might have seen in Monaco a little exchange where he was told to do a few things on his steering wheel by his race engineer, and he was like, "Man, I'm trying to drive it. Don't tell me this. I can't do it. I just can't do it." And I actually, and I watched that, and I thought, do you know what? I kind of feel for Nikita Mazepin here. Because Sector 3 in Monaco is not a good time to be asking someone to program the dashboard computer that is going on. And I had a little exchange with one of my colleagues at Sky who knows about these things. And I had an exchange with Anthony Davidson on this one and said that, I'm actually coming out on Nikita's side. And he said, yeah, no, to be fair, I'm with you. He said, engineers sometimes have no ideas. He said, the MFD 85s or whatever the setting was that he needed to do, that request would take at least 14 individual presses of buttons and probably 3 to 5 turns of a rotary switch, or the MFD, the multifunctional display. So you're trying to go through the swimming pool chicane, and then on to Rascasse and Anthony Nogues, and then you've got a bit of a respite down the straight, and then all the corners come at you again. And you're trying to press the button 14 different times and turn the rotary switch 3 to 5 times. It's too much.
Crofty, I'm one of them nerds that has Lewis's team radio in my ear all the way through the race from F1 TV. And Lewis is the same. He'll be like, don't talk to me in the corners when Bono slips up. But all the way through, every few seconds, it's go menu dash position 3 when you can, all the time, whilst driving at 190 miles an hour.
So it is too much, but the technology is there. The horse is probably bolted. The only way you're going to stop drivers being told to do all this is to ban team radio. Although we like the team radio because we like to hear from the drivers during the course of the race. Little aside, by the way, and because we're all friends here, I'll let you into this. When I asked Bono about that message, I think it came in Malaysia when Lewis gave it, was "Don't talk to me in the corners, man." And I said, "What did you say when Lewis said that?" And Bono said, "Well, I just said, yeah, well, don't ask me a question before the corners, man." Which I thought was a really good answer. And this is why Bono and Lewis get on. He just deadpan, gave it straight, and Lewis got that actually he was part of the solution and the problem at that particular point. Look, technology is, Formula One is a sport that you either love the gladiatorial combat of wheel-to-wheel racing, or you appreciate the engineering excellence of designing machines that can corner at 180 miles an hour, or you appreciate both. There are many facets to Formula One that we can all appreciate. I don't like it when the technology dominates, but then I probably wouldn't like it if the racing or the wheel-to-wheel action just got a bit repetitive, in terms of, and the analogy I always use is cricket. I love Test cricket. I like T20 cricket. I prefer Test cricket because things happen at a slower pace and it takes a lot of strategy to produce that result. I love watching baseball because it takes a while, for things to get drawn out. I don't want to see a baseball match over in 2 innings. But I do want to see a baseball match go to 9 innings and maybe 10 or 11 innings each. I like to see the sport and the narrative play out. Saying that, I'm going to contradict myself because I quite like the idea of sprint races as well, but for very differing reasons on this one. Right, gentlemen, time is against us. We have one more point to bring up here. We go back to Houston. Michael Fleming, you have the honour, sir. Make it good, Michael, because I've saved your point until last here. Make it, and if it's not good, we're going to have to do this whole thing over again. Yeah, and it will be your fault that we've got to do it over and over again until you make a good point to finish it all off. So what do you say, sir?
This is it, man. This is it. So again, I'm the new guy, right? I've been watching for about 2 years now. And I think we've talked quite a bit about some of the solutions that have been here. But the reason I'm here today is I had asked a question, kind of looking at the sport over the last, this would be the 3rd season I've been watching, and just watching the dominance of Mercedes. And now we start to talk, like earlier today, we started to talk about how Red Bull is starting to look at cracking that, right? And some would think, hey, this could be Red Bull's year. Other people are like, yeah, not so fast. But again, we're looking at 2 out of a total of 10 teams that are racing. And it just seems to be Mercedes is always dominant. You've got Red Bull, who is kind of sniffing, right? And then you've got these other teams that are just kind of, and the two teams that I'm specifically looking at least right now, or looking over the last 3 years, is like Haas and Williams. Like, I don't understand. I mean, as much as the initial question could be, what is F1 doing to create parity so that the other teams can compete? I think we talked a little bit about that today as far as what they're looking at doing and the regulations they're starting for next year, but almost looking at the other way, where you look at the Haas teams, you look at the Williams teams, like what are they doing that keeps them wanting to come back? Does that make sense? Because I know that there's certain teams here, and my analogies here are going to be strictly American, right? Because I'm American. And you look at baseball, for example. I don't know how many of you are familiar with baseball, but baseball has done I think a good job of trying to create parity, whether it's kind of salary caps or trade deadlines or whatever that is, mechanisms in place to at least try to create some kind of parity or level playing field, so that it's not just the New York Yankees, sorry, Bobby, every single year. Because there was a time when we were growing up that it was always the Yankees, right? And I'm the LA kid, or it was the Dodgers, right? But, MLB, I think, did a good job of trying to level that playing field, right? Now, I also acknowledge that there are some teams in baseball here that have just figured out how to make money by having a poor product on the field. And I don't get it. Is that kind of the case here in F1? Or does Haas and Williams genuinely believe that they can crack that top 3 in the next year or 2?
Well, listen, I think you've got to be in it to win it. And that's the key. And you've got to start somewhere. So Haas have got to start from the bottom and work their way up. Williams have been at the top, have gone down, and are trying to work their way back up again. But there is absolutely no coincidence that when you invest and put money in the way that Mercedes and Red Bull and Ferrari have done, and Williams did over the years, then success comes your way. In American sport, you have a lot of systems in place to have parity. But for some reason, certainly in American football, certain teams seem to end up in the playoffs and occasionally at the Super Bowl more often than not. So you have to reward investment. You have to reward success. For too many years, for me, the payout in Formula One has been so horribly wrong. How is it that Ferrari got more money 2 years running when Williams finished ahead of them? That's wrong. The prize money should be, the team that wins the championship get the most, but you keep it tight all the way down to the bottom, because that way it helps people then invest that money. But in return for that, you then need to invest into the sport as well. And you need to say, I'm going to be around for 15 years, not I'm going to take the money for 3 years and then go off somewhere else. You don't want people trousering the cash and then running away. So they've got to sign up to F1. But teams have now done that, and I want to see more parity in the prize money. And I think we're going to get that to a certain extent. Ferrari will argue, I'm sure, long into the night why they should get more money than anybody else, because they have been in the sport for longer than anybody else. But interestingly, of course, Ferrari were never at the first race in the World Championship because they were disputing the money. And that's why Alfa Romeo was so strong on that day in Silverstone as well. That's a little aside. I don't know. What keeps Williams and Haas in the game? Stanford, we haven't heard from you for a while. What keeps Williams in the game? Why do you think Williams are still there?
I think for Williams, obviously now it's looked more like a rebuilding, and we talk about the Americans coming into the Formula One, which is quite interesting. We see that like the main title sponsor for Aston Martin and also the investment. I feel like they have more of a game plan. I'm not really sure about the Haas. I don't really see a clear direction, but I feel like the ownership for Williams, they are patiently kind of building it up towards coming up. Maybe they may end up being some sort of a midfield team in some years, maybe 2 or 3 years, I would say. But I doubt I don't know how things are going to work out for Haas. I really don't see the direction, to be honest.
Well, Haas have decided this year, don't bother developing the car, not worth it. Put it all into next year's development, because at best they'll only beat Williams. And the financial reward for doing better next year is greater than doing well this year. Gene Haas's business model is that he wanted that partnership with Fiat, Ferrari's parent company, and the Formula One team helped that. There's a synergy between the two teams and the engineering side as well for his engineering business. It's a business model that works for Gene Haas. And as I say, he's not going anywhere. He is committed to the future of Formula One. Dave and Nick wanted to make a couple of points on this finally. Nick, to you, sir.
I think all the way through the years in Formula One, it's always a case that there generally tends to be 1 or 2 teams that dominate a season. I don't think we've had many seasons where 5 or 6 teams have been battling out for the World Championship. And it kind of works like that because Formula One is at the pinnacle of technology, racing technology. And really, there can only be 1 or 2 teams that have got the time and the money to be at the top. But that revolves a lot. So at the moment, it's Mercedes. It was Red Bull before that. It was Mercedes before that. Then McLaren, all the way back. And I think when a team like Williams is having troublesome years, like they have had recently, I think there's always the knowledge there, especially for the ones that have been around for a long time, that the time will come again that rule changes come in, and maybe something will happen. There'll be another Adrian Newey who comes along and creates something brand new to put on a new car. And with Haas, the same thing applies. I've watched Formula One teams down the back of the grid, and the next year they're near the front, and then they're winning. Mercedes are a fantastic example of that. They weren't all that great, and now look at what happened to them when we had the massive rule changes. So I think a lot of the time, I don't think there are many teams in Formula One who sit there thinking, oh, we're going to be at the back of the grid for the entire time we're here. They're all thinking, if I'm not at the top now, the nature of the sport dictates that at some point we might be.
Excellent. Dave, to you.
I think specifically to what keeps Williams coming back, that team was built around a vision from particularly Sir Frank and his friends, but you have to assume that all the people that got hired, they've all got that same mindset. And it might take generations for that to die out from that team. There's a documentary on Netflix, I don't know if you've seen it, about how Sir Frank put that team together. And it's mind-blowing how hard he had to work just to build it, just to compete. And as a result, it's no surprise to me that they had years of success. And as you say, Nick, they know it can come around again. It's only 5 years or so since they were competing at the very front.
Good point.
And that's not a lifetime ago. I think they have the pieces to be back. And I'm really pleased to see what the new owners have done so far. Little things like we're not renaming the team, kind of respecting the tradition and the soul of it, whilst also saying, let's pay off all the debts. Step 1, we're not going to owe anyone any money. We're going to start building and investing for success. But it's an exciting time, I think.
I think Formula One is on the verge of some very exciting times as well. We have great young drivers. We have teams on the up. There will always be winners. There will always be teams finishing last. That's just the nature of sport. But when you look at the strength on the grid and, fingers crossed, the regulation changes that are coming up as well, I think we're all going to be having a lot of fun on these fan casts for the future. But I would also say, Michael, many, many years ago, I interviewed a man called John Walton, who was the team manager at Minardi when I was working on national radio in the UK. And I said, John, I said, Minardi, you come last every week. You don't score any points. Why do you get it? Why do you put yourself through this week after week after week? He said, Crofty, we do it because we love it and because we can. And I think that is probably the best answer to your why are Williams and Haas still in the game, because they love it. And I think we love Formula One as well. And I've really, really loved chatting to you all today. So Dave, Hayden, Michael, Stanford, Bobby, Mark, Nick, and Stephanie a little bit earlier as well. Thank you so much for giving up your time to come on the first F1 Experiences Fancast. Round of applause to you all, gentlemen, and to Stephanie as well. I've really, really enjoyed this. I hope you've enjoyed watching it as well. We're going to make this regular throughout the season. So if you want to get involved, you can do as well. Go to the F1 Experiences website, f1experiences.com, and you'll see all the details on there on how to join in on the Fancast, just as 8 random people, and that's random as in selected at random, not you are random, people have done today. We might carry on talking Formula One for a little bit longer. Whilst you're on the F1 Experiences website, check out some of the hospitality packages and some of the ticket packages that bring you closer to the sport you love as well. From myself, Crofty, you take care of yourself and have a good day.